2019 session of the Portland City Council. Carla, please call the roll.
Fish,
Here.
Hardesty, Udaly,
Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. And now we'll hear about the rules of order and decorum from legal counsel. Good afternoon, Robert.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Portland City Council. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in council meetings, you may sign up in advance with the council clerk's office for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions or the first readings of ordinances. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. If it does not, you may be ruled out of order. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. When you have 30 seconds left, a yellow light goes on. When your time is done, a red light goes on. If you are in the audience and would like to show your support for something that is said, please feel free to do a thumbs up. If you want to express that you do not support something, please feel free to do a thumbs down. Please remain seated in council chambers unless entering or exiting. If you are filming the proceedings, please do not use bright lights or disrupt the meeting. Disruptive conduct such as shouting or interrupting testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe.
Very good. Thank you. Carla, could you please read our first item, 546?
Adopt PED PDX, Portland Citywide Pedestrian Plan, a 20-year strategy to make Portland a great walking city for everyone.
Commissioner Udaly.
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I'm excited to bring this comprehensive plan to City Council. PED PDX affirms pedestrian mobility as a fundamental human right and the most basic means of transportation and seeks to ensure that pedestrian mobility is a safe, accessible, and attractive experience for everyone in Portland by putting pedestrians at the forefront of city transportation policy, investments, and design. Some basic items to keep in mind as we go through the plan are, and Michelle, I hope I'm not going to be repeating too much of your presentation here. Okay. Pedestrians in Portland are 10 times more likely than people driving to sustain a serious or fatal injury. Because pedestrians suffer a disproportionate number of traffic-related deaths and serious injuries, improving pedestrian safety in Portland is critical to meeting the city's Vision Zero objective of eliminating all deaths and serious injuries on Portland streets by 2025. And I would add, we are all pedestrians. Unless you drive your vehicle from your garage to another garage over and over again and never touch a city street, which is highly unlikely, very sad. And I just need to put that out there because we do hear from some very vocal advocates for vehicles who feel that we are overemphasizing the rights or needs of pedestrians and that car drivers are paying for it, which I just thought was fascinating since I think you do eventually have to get out of your car and walk or roll. Okay. The needs in Portland are enormous. PED PDX tells us that we still have approximately 350 miles of missing sidewalks along our busy arterial and collector streets. That does not include sidewalk gaps on local residential streets, and a need for approximately 3,500 additional marked crosswalks across the city. This is substantially more need than we are likely to have resources to address in the 20-year horizon of the plan. Given the enormity of this need, we have an obligation to ensure that we are directing our limited resources to the most critical locations first. With those guiding items in mind, the PED PDX prioritization framework is based directly on the priorities that Portlanders told us themselves are most important. Locations where people rely on walking, streets where people walking have been killed or injured, and in places connecting to important pedestrian destinations. This touches on equity, safety, and demand. Prioritizing needs using a data-based approach helps ensure we're directing limited resources to locations with the greatest needs first. It aligns our spending priorities with adopted city goals and policies and the public's stated priorities and creates a process that is transparent and repeatable. I'd now like to welcome Director Chris Warner. His first appearance here before us, I believe, as the permanent director of Portland Bureau of Transportation, and Michelle Marks, pedestrian coordinator with PBOT, for the presentation.
Great. Commissioner Daly, thank you. Council, Chris Warner, Director of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. PED-PDX really is our new 20-year plan for making walking safer and more comfortable across Portland. It's an update of our 1998 pedestrian master plan, and it's a culmination of 2 years of work. So PED-PDX reflects changes to the pedestrian policy and design best practices that have emerged since the original 1998 plan was adopted. And it includes really two real critical elements. One of that is transportation equity, and the other is Vision Zero, our approach to pedestrian safety. As the commissioner said, this plan really does impact all Portlanders, since everyone really is a pedestrian. And there are multiple ways that a person can walk. Pedestrians can move using their own 2 legs, a wheelchair, a walker, a cane. PED-PDX really addresses the needs of all Portland's users of the sidewalks and crossings, no matter how they move. The plan was guided by extensive community involvement that really went into this process. Over 5,400 Portlanders participated in the citywide Walking Priority Survey, which really directly informs PED-PDX really in our prioritization and our toolbox. Additionally, PED-PDX sought to engage Portlanders who have been historically marginalized. The project worked with community partners to hold 2 Walking While Black focus groups to elevate the voice of Black Portlanders in PED-PDX. The input received at these focus groups directly informs the strategies and actions of the plan. So to begin, before I turn it over to Michelle, I'd like to show a short video which kind of talked about the community engagement piece, and then we'll go into Michelle's comments. So here we go.
Portland's population is expected to grow rapidly over the next 20 years. We have to be able to absorb this growth in ways that meet the livability needs of our community. The city adopted a new policy in our transportation system plan to prioritize walking first, before all other modes of transportation in our system.
PED-PDX is Portland's citywide pedestrian plan. It will prioritize sidewalks, crossings, and other investments to make walking safer and more comfortable across the city.
We have a committee of 25 dedicated, diverse, passionate community members. They're amazing, and we couldn't do this without them. Because a person's walking experience in Portland varies greatly depending on one's area of the city and physical ability, our PED-PDX Community Advisory Committee members were intentionally selected for their demographic and geographic diversity, as well as their passion for making Portland better for everyone. Some areas of Portland have beautiful pedestrian infrastructure, and some areas have very few sidewalks or safe crossings at all. We partnered with the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication to elevate the range and diversity of needs that people have when it comes to walking in Portland. Their work included the stories of 8 different Portlanders in a video series called Pedestrian Stories.
What I found exciting for this collaboration with the Portland Bureau of Transportation was this opportunity for students to tell the stories with community members rather than simply for community members.
There are really satisfying to around what we see.
Out of all the ways we get around in Portland, people walking are at the greatest risk. Pedestrians make up nearly 1/3 of all traffic-related deaths.
In October of 2013, my son Joe was hit by a car in a marked crosswalk. He was crossing the street in order to catch a bus, and Joe died the next day.
Vision Zero is Portland's goal to eliminate traffic death and serious injuries on Portland streets.
I'm very excited that PED-PDX exists, and also that they're including community members to provide feedback for the plans they make, and they seem very interested in what's important to everybody.
PED-PDX is helping to identify the locations where our resources will be able to make the most impact based on our community priorities. Given the enormous amount of need across the city, we want to make sure that we're directing our limited resources to locations with the greatest need first. To better understand the community's priorities, we asked Portlanders to tell us for themselves the most critical barriers to walking and the places that are most important to improve for walking in Portland. The feedback from our Walking Priorities Survey directly informs the PED-PDX prioritization. Our online survey was open all summer long in 2017, and between that and our in-person outreach efforts, we heard from over 5,400 people from all over the city in 5 languages. However, in analyzing our survey results, we realized that we did not hear from all segments of Portland's population.
In order to engage the Black community, we partnered with 3 organizations, the Portland African American Leadership Forum, the Black Parent Initiative, and our Go Africa House, to host 2 focus groups where we could both bring forward to them and hear responses on the survey that we did citywide. But what we wanted to also understand is what is the experience that these individuals and these community members are having in the right-of-way. A lot of the conversation that we had and the stories that were elevated were around the interactions that they were having with other people. It was everything from what they perceived to be race-based interactions, hate speech, behavior that was specific to their Black experience in Portland. And so what this is doing is positioning us to have a deeper level of consciousness in the planning that we're doing across the Bureau, but also forcing us to address some of these issues. Our goal is to get people out of their cars. Our goal is to have more people walking, more people using transit and other, transportation options. But we know that this type of an experience for these members of the community is really shaping their perceptions of safety, and we want to address that.
We directly incorporated the feedback we heard in our Walking While Black focus groups into the PED-PDX toolbox. The toolbox identifies the key strategies and tools we will use to make walking safer and more comfortable for everyone.
In recognition of the unique needs of Portlanders with disabilities, we also worked with one of our PED-PDX Community Advisory Committee members to organize a workshop for people with disabilities. Participants with a range of disabilities met to brainstorm solutions to make our sidewalks and crossings more accessible for everyone. Many of these ideas are directly incorporated into the PED-PDX toolbox.
In addition to the prioritization framework and toolbox, PED-PDX also includes new pedestrian street classifications across the city that reflect the demand-based priorities we heard in our Walking Priorities Survey. We engaged each of the city's 7 district coalitions to carefully review and help refine the proposed pedestrian classification maps, drawing from participants' knowledge of their neighborhood districts. The pedestrian classifications included in the public review draft of PED-PDX reflect the refinements provided by the district coalitions.
Visit our website now to review the draft plan and give us your thoughts on PED-PDX.
Great. Before I turn it over to Michelle, I just really want to thank staff. They did a phenomenal job. It's been 2 years? It's been a 2-year process in terms of talking to people, doing outreach, really listening and trying to figure out the best way to move forward. And I think I'm just really proud of the work they've done, and we're really happy to be here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Marks.
Thank you, Director Warner. So yes, my name is Michelle Marks. I'm the PBOT Pedestrian Coordinator. I'm also the project lead for PED-PDX. Thank you so much for having me today. I will note that since this video was made, we've engaged in even more process. So we released our public review draft at the beginning of March. It was posted online and distributed as far and wide as we possibly could for about 2 months. We took public comment. We organized 7 what we called view and review parties across the city in every district of the city, and engaged in as broad a campaign as we could to get the word out and worked with our community partners to do that. So absolutely a lot of outreach went into this effort. And I will want to call out my colleague Francesca Patricolo, who was the architect for most of that. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today to share with you what I think is a really, really exciting plan for Portland. The vision for PED-PDX is that our city is a truly walkable city for all. And I'm really enthusiastic about the work, not only that staff and the project team has done on this, but our huge coalition of community partners that have worked on this with us as well, many of which are in the room with us today. So thank you all. I really appreciate your time and effort. So I'll just briefly walk you through the content of the plan. So I won't restate our mission. Commissioner Udaly stated this for us in our opening remarks, but I will underscore that this affirmation of walking as a fundamental human right and the most fundamental means of transportation really does guide the content of the plan throughout. And I think you'll see that. So I know it's a very large plan. It's a 20-year plan, so it's likely to be large. But there really are just 3 fundamental components to be aware of. The first piece is identifying what we call the pedestrian priority network. And this is just a collection of all of the streets in Portland with new and updated pedestrian classifications. In aggregate, that's identified as our priority network. And these really are reflective of our comprehensive land use vision for the city, locations where we have now or anticipate to see high levels of people walking. Excuse me. The second piece of the plan is within that network, we've identified every sidewalk gap and crosswalk gap throughout the entire network and developed a prioritization methodology for determining which of those needs are most critical to address first. And then finally, the last piece of the plan is what we've called our implementation toolbox. And this is a collection of all of the implementing strategies and actions that we as a city are making a public commitment to exploring to make the city walkable all across the network. There are 68 actions that we're committing to here. So really briefly, what is the state of walking in Portland? We know we have some significant issues that PED-PDX needs to address. And one is traffic safety. So pedestrians, people walking, are disproportionately impacted by traffic safety, despite the fact that 9% of all trips, more or less, in Portland are walking trips. Approximately 30% of traffic fatalities impact pedestrians. And we know that this is an equity issue as well. Portlanders that have to walk, including those who are transit reliant, most people walk to the bus stop, are most exposed to what really are systemic safety issues. We also know that people walking in East Portland die in traffic crashes at twice the rate of people walking elsewhere in Portland on a per person basis. So we absolutely have traffic safety issues to address. We also have significant infrastructure issues to address as well. I think outside of Portland, our community has a reputation for being a very walkable city, which it is, but I think we also all know that there are too many instances of this in our city as well. No sidewalks, no safe place for a person to walk. And so PED-PDX did something that we haven't done today, and that's take a really solid accounting of where we have missing sidewalks. So the map on the screen here shows all locations in green, where we know we have sidewalks present on both sides of the roadway. Locations in blue, where we have sidewalks only on one side of the roadway. And locations in purple, where we are missing sidewalks on both sides of the roadway. And the geographic patterns are clear. We're missing sidewalks in southwest Portland, in outer east Portland, areas of the city that were annexed in the latter half of the 20th century. To put some numbers behind that, as the commissioner noted.
Can I ask you a question?
Of
Commissioner
course.
Daly, would you prefer us to get through the presentation and ask, or what's your preference?
I do think, unless it's a clarifying question.
Yeah, but let's go
let's
ahead and let
finish,
you
'cause-
finish,
Thank
and
you.
I'll write my question.
Sounds
Thank
good. So on our arterial and collector system, we know that 32%, thank you, 32% of those street segments are missing sidewalks on both sides of the roadway, and that's a big number. As the commissioner noted, that's about 350 miles of missing sidewalk on our busy streets alone, only arterials and collectors. So that we know, given the enormity of that number, that we have to prioritize, we have to make sure we're sending investments to the most critical locations first. Crosswalks, again, we absolutely want to emphasize marked and safe protected crossings as a critical component of the pedestrian network. But again, we know we have too many places in the city, like what we're seeing in the image here, where there's just not a marked crossing in sight. So, this poor man just has very little choice but to do what he's doing here. So we looked at all of our arterial and collector streets in our priority network and found that to meet our new crossing spacing guidelines, we need about 3,500 new crossings. Again, much more than we're going to be able to deliver in the 20-year horizon of this plan. We must prioritize, we must address the most critical needs first. So how did we do that? So PED-PDX developed a prioritization methodology that was based directly on what we heard Portlanders tell us are the most important locations to improve for walking. As the director in the video noted, our citywide survey had about 5,400 responses in multiple languages. Beyond the survey itself, we also engaged directly with communities, community partners, and district coalitions. And what we heard are, if we must prioritize, the top needs, the top priorities really fall under these three buckets of equity, safety, and demand. So this is how PED-PDX structures its prioritization. We analyzed our entire priority network based on those criteria of equity, where we have high equity needs, where we know we have safety concerns, and where we have or expect to see high number of people walking. And when we aggregate those analyses, what we find, what that yields are street segments where we have overlapping equity needs that overlap with safety concerns and lots of number of people walking. And that tells us exactly where in our network are the most critical locations. So what we see in the map here are our top tier priority locations for ensuring we have safe pedestrian conditions. Tier 1 in purple, Tier 2 in red, down to Tier 3 in yellow. All three of those considered top tier priorities, all the way down to Tier 4 and 5 in green and blue. And what we've done is gone back and matched up those locations where we know we have missing sidewalks and where we have missing crosswalks against those top tier locations. And what this yields us are what we think need to be our near-term priorities for providing new sidewalk and crossing infrastructure moving forward. Now, I want to point out that what PED-PDX sets forth is the methodology for analyzing pedestrian need. The intent is that this analysis is run regularly and updated regularly. The benefit of that is it keeps our plan dynamic. We get to use fresh safety and equity data regularly so that we're staying current, we're responding to current need and to changing conditions over time. So finally, the last piece of the PED PDX is what we're calling our toolbox. And again, as we stated in the video, it's directly informed by the outreach that we did, namely, and not uniquely, but our Walking While Black focus groups, as well as our workshops with members of the disability community in Portland. And there are a lot of actions here. We're making a public commitment to explore 67 actions to make walking safer and more comfortable in Portland. Clearly, I can't go over all of them with you today, even though I think every one of them are exciting. But a couple I'll just highlight. These are some actions that specifically came out of our Walking While Black and disability focus groups. One is to implement new vision clearance guidelines and set back parked vehicles at uncontrolled crossings to improve visibility of pedestrians and, frankly, for all people using the roadway at intersections. This one was very much important to members in our disability workshop who don't always feel seen, particularly when they are low in a wheelchair behind a parked car. But this is an issue for everybody, of course.
And I'd just like to note, Michelle, that Portland standards are actually lower than the state standards. We do have some kind of exemption, but state standards don't allow parking within 20 feet of the corner. And I believe it's, if your vehicle is over 6 feet, it can't be parked within 50 feet. And we have people parking right up to the corner. And it really is a problem, not just for pedestrians of all types, but also drivers and cyclists.
Absolutely.
And does this include taking away parking meters where the parking space is within the corner?
I can answer that. So within a parking meter district, we will absolutely do an engineering analysis to determine if there is a site stopping safety issue at that intersection. And if the engineering analysis finds that it is, then yes, we would pull that parking meter.
Thank you.
And I think that many of the parking meter districts there'll be controlled intersections there. There'll be lights. There generally are lights where we have most of the parking meters, so a lot of the parking meters. Thank you.
Another action that was really, really important to members in our disability workshop was to study prohibiting turn on red at signalized intersections, particularly in high-demand pedestrian districts and at high-crash intersections. So we'll be evaluating that. Sidewalk repair. There are several actions in the toolbox related to revamping and revisiting our sidewalk repair practices. One that I'll call out here that we've been working with Commissioner Udaley's staff on is how can we identify financing strategies and cost-saving opportunities to help bring down the burden of sidewalk repair to property owners. So we'll be moving forward on that. And then several actions came out of our Walking While Black focus group, specifically speaking to the issue of how can we improve not just a sense of traffic safety in the right-of-way, but also sense of personal safety and security. It's hard to convince more people to walk if they don't feel safe doing it. So increasing lighting levels, particularly in underserved communities, was a key action that came out of those focus groups. And PED PDX does include new lighting level guidelines citywide to make folks more visible and seen in our streets. So that's all I have for you today.
Thank you, Michelle. Before we open it up, I want to just ask you real quick. So of the three buckets, I think safety's obvious, how we define that. Demand is fairly self-explanatory, but can you define equity for the purposes of this plan?
Absolutely. So we used PBOT's standardized equity matrix, which looks at census, race, and income data by census tract. And this is the standardized approach that I think PBOT, my understanding, is worked out with the Office of Equity and Human Rights and is also national best practice.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I'll go in reverse order just because it's more fun. So this isn't a question, it's really a request. So this council has just passed funding for the Dark Skies Initiative. And I want to make sure that we don't have one group working on increasing light levels and another group working on reducing light levels. Is there some way to combine these efforts so that they're informing each other? Actually, I wanted to put that in the form of a statement with a period at the end. We're funding both, so let's make sure that they're in coordination. Commissioner Udaly is well familiar with this, so.
Yeah, I share your concerns, Mayor, and there are different configurations of the type of lights as well as the type of fixtures that we use that can minimize disruption and light pollution. And if Michelle has anything to add to that, I mean, I'm personally happy to work in conjunction with the, I'm sorry, I got
Dark
so
skies,
many
the dark
emails
skies
about it, I should know it by
That was
heart.
an amendment
Dark Skies
Commissioner
Initiative.
Fish had brought to the budget.
Yes, I'm very
which-
supportive and.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, that the type of fixture and providing making sure that the light is downcast rather than spread up is the most important thing.
Very
to
good.
do,
And you identified crossings, and that's something this council has had many, many discussions about. But one thing I haven't received clarity on, what is the cost per crossing? Do we have some sort of a working estimate that we use?
It really depends on the type of improvement that's needed at any particular location. So if it's, just a simple marked crosswalk on a 2-lane road, that is, a much simpler, much cheaper solution than if you have to provide, one of those yellow rectangular flashing beacons or a red signal and a median in the middle. So it really depends on the type of roadway.
So it would be helpful to me if, now that you've gone through all the iterations and you've identified the highest priority investments, it seems to me we could be able to start putting brackets around the potential cost, the potential annual outlay, understanding what sort of, we could start to actually get to the capital financing. What sort of revenues need to be leveraged for what amount of bonds in order to be able to do those capital improvements. And I'd be interested in that analysis. And I know there's lots of people in OMF who'd be happy to help with that. The original chart you showed the percentage of sidewalks or the percentage of streets where there are no sidewalks on both sides of the streets, just sort of giving it a quick eyeball. It looks like there's a number of streets that are included in that analysis where it just isn't feasible. I mean, there are just some places where we are not going to be able to put sidewalks in. Has there been any effort to filter those from the analysis or identify those as areas where it just isn't feasible?
Not in that planning level analysis. However, the toolbox does include an array of alternative walking path solutions that might be appropriate in those types of locations. So I think moving forward, the intent, because this is intended to be a dynamic plan, is as we've analyzed those locations and determine what's feasible or what's not, we can adjust that data set and pull that from the backlog.
Okay. Low cost, easy solution. I have no idea about the level of effectiveness, but at very high volume pedestrian crossings that we know are significant safety hazards, until we can address those either through education or infrastructure or enforcement or some combination of the above. I've seen an interesting simple solution. Who doesn't love Sisters, Oregon, right? And in the summer, the crosswalks are very, very busy, and there's a lot of traffic going through. And on either side, they put large buckets with bright orange flags, and you pick it up on one side and you wave the flag, and the kids love doing that, and the traffic sees it, and then on the other side, you dump the flag back in the bucket. Have we thought of something like that just as a temporary opportunity at areas where we know crossings are a real issue and that people may not be well seen? Just until we do the other things we need to do to make it up to standard?
I don't know that we've actively explored that particular idea for crossings, but we are very eager to look at all sorts of, opportunities to provide improvements to people now who don't want to wait, 20 years for the perfect improvement. We're absolutely doing that for sidewalks, trying to figure out how to provide, just some kind of safe walking path that's separated from traffic. The sidewalk, yes, is the perfect solution, but what can we do now? Maybe it's pull out the on-street parking and put in some sort of, physical curb separation on the fog line so there's some kind of path now, or provide traffic calming to get the cars moving slower so you feel safer walking along the side of the road. I do think that conversation should be expanded to look at what we can do for crossings as well.
Good. And I want to applaud you for the analysis. I think it's fantastic. And thank you for giving me some time to actually read through it before the session today. Commissioner Fish, then Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that I want to ask Director Warner. And first, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
The last time that we were presented with something that was this comprehensive that I can think of was probably the update to the Bike Master Plan or something, and I'm going to go weigh that document compared to this document, but this is like a phone book. And the criticism that we got with the Bike Master Plan is that we set this big vision, but we didn't have the resources to implement it. And that has come up from time to time as we do big visions, and then people have expectations, and then we fall short in implementing because of the harsh realities of budgets and resources. So let me start with one of the, let me see what page it is, but early in this excellent report, it lists the PED PDX objectives, page 15. And number 3 is funding. Commit to funding pedestrian network improvements in the pedestrian priority network. So we're going to be asked to adopt a report that has a very explicit objective around funding these very worthy things. Have you done an analysis of what additional resources PBOT would need to fully fund this plan?
Commissioner Fish, we have not necessarily, but it is, in terms of any funding going forward, that is part of this analysis. And it is a 20-year plan. Hopefully, we can tear pages out and we'll be lighter by the time we get to the 20th year. But certainly, what we want this to be is kind of the foundation as we look for additional funding to keep these in mind, all of these priorities in mind, because this really is kind of the building blocks of the foundation that we're building. So it's great to identify what the fundamentals are, and then as we move forward with funding over the next 20 years, we'll want to plug in every opportunity we can to make sure that we get the priority ones funded.
I would be interested at some point even in a back-of-the-envelope number, because having a number helps put it in the context of other things that PBOT is committed to and helps us prioritize funding at budget time. The second question I had for you is the section on public outreach is one of the most, comprehensive I've ever seen at page 339 and forward. So the public involvement plan. And since all of us up here are interested in learning lessons about how to enhance the public involvement process, and when a bureau moves the goalpost, we want to know about it, understand it. I guess I had 2 questions for you. One was, what are you most proud of in terms of things that you did? And just skimming this section, I don't remember a report that had a more robust public engagement process. But what did you learn? What are you most proud of? And then how'd you pay for it? What does it cost to do something this ambitious?
I'll ask, she will answer the funding question since the money was spent before I got here. But certainly, I think the piece that I'm most proud of, and I think we've referred to it a couple of times, is kind of the analysis and the additional outreach we did with the Walking While Black. I mean, we had identified that during our Vision Zero work, that it's not just a matter of getting infrastructure where people feel safe, or the infrastructure and the engineering is good, but it's how people interact with the right-of-way. So I think when we got to this point in this plan where we had all of the data, we actually looked at each other and said, I think we need to take a deeper dive and to do these focus groups in order to actually see how people interact with the right-of-way. So it's not just a matter of numbers and statistics and speed, but it's also a matter of how residents of Portland interact. And so that to us is something that we really took to heart, and it's something that we feel that we can use for additional outreach in terms of how do we actually talk to communities. It's not just a matter of having people at the table. It's taking the table to people and to figure out how we as a bureau can actually do better outreach. One of the things that is so great about kind of the work we do is, we're an infrastructure bureau, so we have, dump trucks and shovels and all those kind of things, but we also interact with the public in a very real way every day. So we really want to take that engagement to the next level. So really, the thanks go to the staff in terms of really having this robust public outreach process, but it's something that we'd love to replicate for all the work we do.
Yeah, and I can add on to that. So, our whole team was absolutely adamant that if we were developing a plan that we're saying was based on Portlanders' priorities, that we needed to be very sure that we were actually hearing from Portlanders in a representative way. So we took very seriously, doing some detailed demographic analysis on exactly who we were hearing back in our survey and making sure that it matched the ratios of the different types of folks that make up our population. And when we saw that it wasn't, we know we needed to do some additional outreach. And, frankly, it didn't cost that much more. A couple of focus groups don't cost that much. I will say that, my colleague Francesca Patricolo here is very good at applying for grants and got some grants from America Walks to do these fabulous, pedestrian walking stories that were on our website that got, I think, tens of thousands of views and helped to build empathy for the different ways people walk across Portland and the different kind of opportunities and challenges that people across the city face. So having a really good grant writer on your team is also an asset.
I just want to add one more thing. I mean, one of the most gratifying things for me is, as you know, the staff does all the work, and I got to go to kind of the final meeting of the advisory committee, and it was such a celebration, and it was such a wonderful experience because Portlanders really came together to write this plan, and I was really touched and gratified by just the work that all the citizens put into this. So that was another moment that really struck it for me.
Thank you.
Director Warner, could I interrupt for just one moment? A little bit of housekeeping here. If there's anybody here waiting for the next item, item 547, which is the time certain at 3:30 related to approving mini area parking permit, the mini area parking permit program, we're not actually going to hear that today. So if anybody's waiting for that, I don't want you to spend time here thinking that that's coming up.
Hopefully we got the word out.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Fritz.
Director Warner, my congratulations to you.
Thank
I
you.
was really happy to see that you got the position.
Thank you.
So this is obviously a lot of work over many years, and I was interested to see Commissioner Saltzman on some of those photographs, as well as Irene has a different last name now.
I know. Exactly.
And I just got it on Monday, so I would really appreciate some more time to look through it and would have appreciated a briefing. So I'm going to ask some pretty basic questions because I'm not quite understanding what I'm reading. I'm looking at page 124 and 25, which is the prioritized crossing needs. And I'm not understanding what a yellow line versus a yellow dot means.
I can explain that. So, thank you for asking. That's the yellow dots. In fact, all of the colored dots are locations where we have a potentially deficient crossing. So it's not a crossing gap. It's a location where an existing crossing exists, but it may not be up to our current design guidelines, and we need to go back and evaluate that. So for example, it might just be a marked crossing when our current design guidelines would call for a marked crossing plus a warning beacon, for example.
Thank you, that's helpful. So I see that Fessenden is aligned, so apparently it's got gaps. But why aren't there any dots on that? Because we've heard a lot over the past several months about deficient crossings on Fessenden.
Well, I think if there are no dots, then it means that our planning level data and analysis did not show those as deficient.
I guess
Okay.
one thing I would add is we're making a lot of improvements as we speak on Fessenden. So I don't know if that reflects that or not, but Fessenden is,
Yeah, I know. I just would have thought that
Yeah.
you would be able, it would show up that it was going to need those, and therefore that
right.
you are doing them, and we had some nice feedback this morning that the community appreciates it.
Right.
So I was just wondering, trying to understand better, and then if you look across the central city map, why is Southwest Broadway listed as having crossing gaps when there are crosswalks? It's on a grid.
Yeah, thank you. So our new crossing spacings guidelines note that within a pedestrian district, so the entire center city, we'd like to see marked pedestrian crossings approximately every 530 feet. So with our kind of 200-foot block module, that's about every other block in the center city. So I'm guessing there are locations along Broadway where we might not have crossings, where it might be every 3 blocks, and that's popping up
They're all
as a gap.
marked.
On
Broadway, they're all marked.
Yeah.
So
You can take a look at
Yeah,
that.
we'll take a
details like
look,
that.
yeah.
And then finally, I have
Down
got
further,
several
there's-
questions, but
I think that might actually be the park blocks that you're looking at.
is it the park blocks?
Yeah.
Oh,
'cause
yes.
Broadway.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah. And
But then why is it not on 9th as well as on Park?
well,
'cause
I
they're
see
both the
2
same.
yellow stripes, which would be 9th and Park, on either side of the
Okay.
park blocks. And there are definitely a lot of missing crosswalks, and I think we had a pedestrian fatality.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, that's
yeah,
helpful.
Yeah, it's hard to.
So the next question is still, actually, it's turning the page to prioritize sidewalk needs. On an earlier slide where you showed the feedback from the community of what was important to them, I live in Deep Southwest, so I happened to notice that what was important to them is school access, safe routes to schools, and yet the prioritized sidewalk needs aren't where on 35th where the school is. So I'm wondering, how come only Barbara and only some parts of Barbara got prioritized sidewalk needs rather than?
Sure, yeah, I think I can answer that. So the prioritized locations are the aggregate, the cumulative location of where we have high demand, which would include the demand on safe routes to school, where we also have a history of traffic crashes and 4 and 5 lane roadways and high-speed roadways, so safety problems, and locations where we have equity issues, so where the 3 overlap. So absolutely, locations, streets that connect to schools are part of the demand analysis, but we also, to be prioritized, need to have safety and equity needs identified on top of those locations as well, all 3.
Well, then why ask the community other factors if that's what you're going to base the prioritization on?
Well, the community feedback absolutely informed the demand plus safety plus equity methodology. And they told us which types of demand within the demand analysis were most important. So that was connections to community destinations and transit and schools. So that's what we use to construct our demand analysis.
Okay. And then my last question is on the pedestrian priority network and what's a neighborhood walkway?
Yeah, thank you. So in the past, our 1998 pedestrian plan only included pedestrian classifications for arterial and collector level streets. But PADPDX is now identifying certain what we consider higher order local residential streets as part of our network. So local streets that are either a designated safe routes to school or connect to transit are designated as what we call neighborhood walkways. So those are local streets.
And what do they get?
Sorry?
What would you get in a neighborhood walkway that you wouldn't?
No,
if you
it's
were
a
to-
good question. So the by merit of being part of the pedestrian priority network, those streets are more eligible for public investment.
Okay. Again, that's not, with the criteria of it being to transit and the routes to school, that doesn't necessarily map out, I don't understand how this got designated, but maybe I can have a follow-up conversation.
Sure, happy to.
Very good. Before we go on, kids, where are you from? Excellent. Welcome. Thanks for coming to City Hall. We appreciate it. Questions? Remainder of questions?
I just want to note that this plan was put up online and accessible to the public in the spring. We took comment for 90 days, as well as all the active outreach that we did. But it is sounding like commissioners could have used a briefing or some information more in advance. And I think with something of this size, that is warranted. Although I do want to point out, it's really only 335 pages. The other 100 or two are appendices. All right. We have invited testimony. Would you like me to call people up? or-
Sure.
Okay, great. So, our first group, I believe, is going to be made up of Jess Thompson from Oregon Walks, and just come to the table as I call you, Kem Marks from Rosewood Initiative, and Janet Hawkins from PED PDX CAC member from Southwest. And you can give testimony in any order. Just state your name for the record before you begin, and welcome.
Okay. Greetings, Commissioner Udaly, Commissioner Fritz, Commissioner Fish, and Mayor Wheeler.
Good afternoon.
My name's Jess Thompson. I'm the Executive Director at Oregon Walks. My pronouns are she and hers. I've been listening and learning and thinking a lot about what it means to feel safe while walking. For so long, the experience of walking as it exists in our public discourse has focused on infrastructure, which is so important. And people experience pedestrian infrastructure differently depending on their identities. I look forward to listening and learning more with you about how we might begin to build a more inclusive idea of what safety while walking means. Before I kick off my testimony about this particular plan, I want to highlight a bill that passed the Senate yesterday. This bill is a tool to begin to create a safer environment for walking in Portland and throughout the rest of the state. Representative Bynum and others led an effort that will make it possible to sue people who call the police for racist reasons. This is something we should all be celebrating, and it is another tool to create a safer and more equitable walking experience for all. I'm here today, though, to talk to you specifically about the PED PDX plan. There's much to celebrate in this plan. It is a roadmap of how we can continue the important pedestrian investments the city put into place with the adoption of the 1998 Pedestrian Master Plan and the 2018 adoption of the Transportation System Plan. I want to thank specifically Irene Marion, the Equity and Inclusion Manager at PBOT, and Tosin Abiodun, the Constituent Services Coordinator at PBOT, Michelle Marks, Pedestrian Coordinator, and of course, Francesca Petricolo, the Innovation and Regional Collaboration Team Member. In midst of what is a very technical document, it is apparent that people in equity are at the center of PED PDX. This team has created a document that is helping Oregon Walks, other community partners, and the city consider more broadly what it means to be and feel safe while walking in Portland. We didn't want to walk past this process, so to speak, we see modeled here without taking a moment to add exclamation points in agreement in order to draw other bureaus toward successful duplication. Additionally, we suggest this community engagement model be shared with other municipalities engaging in urban development projects. So what's so special about this community engagement process? First, more equitable data collection. The team here implemented a survey, listened to the feedback, and thought about whose voices were missing. What they discovered is that Black people make up about 6% of the people in Portland, but the initial community engagement work resulted in 2% of the respondents identifying as Black. Many teams would have kept the work plan moving. This team stopped, and I think, Commissioner Fish, this speaks directly to your question about what exactly happened to make this community engagement process so special. This team stopped, and they consulted with Irene Marion and Tosin Abiodun, who offered very skilled and critical mentorship about adapting the community engagement process to make sure it was inclusive. So the team tried different approaches outlined in this report that resulted in hugely important learning for the city about the experience of walking while Black in Portland. Secondly, the team actually used the community engagement learning to inform the plan, all while using an equity lens. After adapting the community engagement processes, the teams incorporated what community members were telling them about their lived experience of walking in Portland. I watched this team listen to people in East Portland and go back that evening to update the pedestrian plan, asking people most historically ignored at best by municipalities what they think, and then actually incorporating that feedback into a plan. It's pretty revolutionary. The team here also truly identified and prioritized the needs of people who are walking dependent for transportation and live in woefully underinvested areas of Portland, specifically areas east of 82nd Avenue. When I say that Oregon Walks support this plan, I mean we support it because it is very good for pedestrians. And we also support this plan because it is a solid example of how we might begin to operationalize equity in urban planning. When the city practices listening, believing, and including the experiences of people most historically hurt by urban planning, you begin to build trust and a possible path forward to repair decades of exclusionary harm. In particular, Oregon Walks celebrates the Walking While Black survey and focus group results, which show safety and visibility are major concerns. This plan highlights these concerns and calls for significant street lighting investments. Let's make this happen. Additionally, this document calls for increased visibility at crosswalks, specifically by providing high visibility crosswalks and parking setbacks on pedestrian prioritization streets. Let's make this happen. Oregon Walks does not think this plan goes far enough to promote pedestrian visibility, however. We are kicking off a campaign to educate and build awareness around the need for increased visibility at crosswalks. We are calling this campaign Clear the Corners. We are asking the city to implement 20-foot setbacks at all corners. This promotes visibility for all walkers, rollers, and drivers. On behalf of Oregon Walks, we would like to thank the team at PBOT for creating such a people-centered PDX plan. Thank you for helping Portland expand our ideas of what walking safety looks and feels like for a variety of communities. Thank you for helping Portland see what a more equitable community engagement process might look like. We also know that this plan is just that, a plan. The devil is in the implementation. We look forward to working with you to make sure the critical community feedback that informs this document is operationalized on the ground and in the streets. Walk on.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Cam Marks. I'm the Director of Transportation Equity at the Rosewood Initiative in Outer East Portland. I'd like to start by I'm going to be summarizing my comments that I've prepared and given to you all. I'd like to start by thanking Commissioner Udaley. Thank you to Michelle and Francesca and the rest of the PDOT staff for their excellent work. We do support this plan. We do think, however, there are things that can be changed or improved, and we do have some concerns about certain elements. The first thing that I'd like to address is the issue of funding. Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, I would like to push back about the mentality of limited resources. We have one of the most prosperous periods in our city's history. There's money out there. We just have to find ways of finding it and getting it. One way of doing that is to increase the parking permit districts. We need to stop giving away one of our biggest assets for the city, and that is on-street parking. We need to stop relying on development to get residential infill, especially in places like East Portland and specifically around roads or streets that are used as cut-throughs for traffic, pedestrians, and that are routes to schools. We need to come up with creative means of raising revenue to focus on those areas. An example is in the comments that I have provided you. Now for the nuts and bolts of getting into the weeds. We believe that right turns on reds need to be eliminated. 8% of all driver on pedestrian crashes are through this maneuver. In addition, the University of Toronto has found that over 50% of drivers attempting to turn right on red are not looking right to see if the crosswalk is clear, they're looking left. That causes crashes and near misses. I have experienced near misses like that many times in my life. Another aspect of this is that drivers pull into the crosswalk, which prohibits or impedes the pedestrian trying to use the crosswalk, forcing them to go into the through lane or behind them. That is dangerous for all pedestrians, but especially for people with disabilities, children, and seniors. We support the Clear the Corner campaign by Oregon Walks. Examples of design that would help are being proposed on Outer Division at 122nd, 148th, and 162nd, commonly known as Dutch corners. PBOT must implement a proactive policy and of changing audible signals for people that are blind and visually impaired. That relying on capital projects to implement these upgrades is totally insufficient. The current system, many intersections lack them. Many intersections have tonal signals that are completely confusing. I am myself almost walked into the intersection because I was confused as to which signal was being indicated. I need to push back on the concept of shared roadways for drivers and pedestrians. Examples on page 274 and 276 are frankly inadequate and unacceptable. They don't provide context for blind and visually impaired people to know where they are in relationship to the street and to vehicles. They don't give context as to where crosswalks are and intersections are. I live on 136th Avenue between Powell and Holgate. This is a route to school. There are many drivers and many pedestrians that use this route twice a day during the school year. It's supposed to be a low volume, low speed street, and I can guarantee you that drivers exceed the speed often at extreme speeds on this route. Those kinds of situations. It also has places where a person with a mobility device would not be able to get off of the street surface, and the lighting is absolutely terrible. crosswalk types. This needs to be implemented based on the behavior of the actual drivers and not just on the width of the street and the number of lanes. An example is 174th Avenue. It will not get enhanced crossings like RF, rapid flashing beacons or hybrids because it's a 2-lane road. However, drivers routinely speed down this road. We get through traffic from down south in Pleasant Valley. Truck drivers, especially dump trucks heading to Happy Valley, use this route all the time. This kind of street context has to matter, and we need to be much more sensitive to that context. Having said that, again, I'd like to thank the Commissioner Udaley and the PBOT staff for what I believe is a very decent plan, and with improvements could be an excellent plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners, my name is Janet Hawkins, and I was one of the members of the PDX Community Advisory Committee. And I too, as my fellow testifiers have said, I want to commend staff for their work on the plan. I live in Southwest Portland, and I'm a pedestrian every day, walking about 2 to 3 miles and through the neighborhoods. And my testimony today is going to focus on 2 key content areas, Toolbox Strategy 1 and Toolbox Strategy 7. For Toolbox Strategy 7, manage vehicle speeds and improve driver awareness. Commissioner Wheeler, you asked about some of the things that could be innovative, creative, less expensive than capital projects, and that came to mind immediately in my testimony. I have a direct experience as chair of my neighborhood association and volunteering with Southwest Transportation Committee, and I've been fortunate enough to participate and volunteer with a number of safety vigils for the city. So working with PBOT, working with the Police Bureau, and gosh, I think I've done like 5 or 7 safety vigils, you know, bright vests, flashing lights, keeping everybody safe, and volunteering at busy intersections to let drivers know that bikes and pedestrians are there any time of the day or the evening or the morning. We conducted a safety vigil, our neighborhood association, Hayhurst, in early January, on January 2nd, to highlight the fact that children and youth were going to be back in school after the Christmas holiday break. And we decided to conduct that at Southwest 45th and Vermont, pretty busy intersection right by Southwest Community Center, early evening, 5 to 7 p.m. We had volunteers. We had our bright orange safety vests on, lots of flashers, lots of lights. And we were accompanied by Police Officer Jacobson, who was there to do informational stops for drivers who weren't complying with Portland's traffic codes. So during that 2-hour period, I tell people it's pretty scary. Because despite having a lot of folks around, a lot of kids, a lot of youth, a lot of families going to Southwest Community Center, there were still a lot of drivers who were inattentive, they were distracted. All those things kind of came to the fore during that 2-hour period. I have to say, Officer Jacobson, who was with us, stopped 10 drivers in a 2-hour period for inattentive driving, speeding, and failure to stop for traffic signals. So that's about a stop. I think it's about every 12 minutes. He had the lights going, flashers. And this is, for those of you who know the intersections, it's well lighted. There's lighting, there are marked crosswalks, there are lighted pedestrian crossing signals. And yet people continue to speed and be inattentive and erratic and unsafe in their driving. And that was the norm for some of these drivers, not all drivers, but that's enough to put pedestrians and bicyclists at tremendous risk in those situations. So as a city, I just feel very strongly, and through personal experience and community experience, Toolbox Strategy 7 is about lowering our speeds and improving driver awareness. I guess if it takes a ticket, it takes a ticket, or a police stop. Maybe that's the kind of key awareness that needs to be there. And I think it's really important for folks to see those lights on the police car in a preventative situation versus in a serious crash situation. So that's one thought I had in mind when we talked about what's affordable, what's doable, and certainly the involvement of the Police Bureau. The second strategy I want to talk about is Strategy 1, which addresses gaps in the pedestrian priority network. And I noted during the staff presentation there were a number of questions about the pedestrian priority network and how equity, safety, and demand really framed the discussion around the priority network. So as a representative of Southwest Portland, there were two other representatives of Southwest Portland on the Community Advisory Committee. We all felt this is a really challenging aspect of the plan. And today you're going to hear about informed, thoughtful testimony from other folks in Southwest who want to talk about those infrastructure concerns they may have and what the plan reflects. As an advisory committee member, staff were excellent about really trying to find numbers and information, and around the equity information, where are the communities of color, low and moderate income households, how do we look at the census data, how do we do that kind of analysis? And again, I commend staff for going the extra mile, for working with committee members and looking for other data sets and really spending time with us on around that kind of content to make sure that those communities were reflected and their needs were reflected for Southwest Portland. It's clear as a city, when we developed Portland in the 50s and the 60s and Southwest was growing as was East Portland, that our zoning code placed multifamily housing on our busiest streets. So Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, Barber Boulevard, Macadam Avenue are all very busy streets, and that's where the concentration of the multifamily housing is. And that's where our families are, communities of color. It's where affordable housing in, low and moderate income households live in that housing. But we also, in doing so, place vulnerable populations on our busiest streets. And so those are the streets where the pedestrian crashes are the highest and most likely to occur in injury and death for the pedestrians or bicyclists in those areas. PED PDX addresses those inequities for Southwest residents. I feel like it does a good job of starting that analysis of inequities, and Michelle Marks talked about the capacity of the plan to change with information. I'm encouraged that we're going to have a Census 2020 coming up. We're going to get new low mod income data for Southwest as well as for other neighborhoods in Portland. But we need to make sure, and one of the key things that comes up in the plan is to improve our transit stop safety along those busy streets and for capital improvements for sidewalks on our busiest streets. The plan prioritizes critical improvements in East Portland based on pedestrian crash data. And my view, and you'll hear different views today, I'm sure, my view is that the capital improvements in East Portland will have an immediate impact on reducing pedestrian deaths and injuries. No doubt about it, twice the city number, our house is on fire, and we need to put that fire out. And this is a 20-year plan, and I think we really recognize that we need to focus our resources and our energy in essentially the struggle that's out there for people living in East Portland. I also know that capital improvements are planned for Southwest Portland. The Southwest in Motion plan, I think it will be coming before council soon, highlights the work that will occur. So I know there's been lots of work around looking at that capital infrastructure. And I'm also confident that council will be responsive to pedestrian safety needs throughout the city and be aware and thoughtful about where that investment can take place in the city. So we all have places to go. We should be able to walk safely and without fear of death or injury. And my feeling is that PED PDX plan offers a clear and comprehensive guide for all of us to get wherever we're going safely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three.
Could I ask one question?
Commissioner Fish,
Just,
you bet.
I'll be very quick, and this goes to Oregon Walks. So I too share your enthusiasm for the Clear the Corner initiative. I wonder, what is your view of all of the parking garages downtown where you have a similar dynamic, actually a worse dynamic in some respects? You have cars coming onto the sidewalk, often blind, and then you have them making a turn, typically onto a one-way street, with the same impediment, which is a car blocking the view, so you don't see whether there's a bike or a car. What are your thoughts about that?
Maybe we should expand the Clear the Corners campaign to include a Clear the Parking Garage entrance and exits. You're exactly right. Your point is well taken that is another area where parked cars are putting pedestrians at risk.
Thank you.
I mean, honestly, I think the garages could also do a better job with signage, making cars stop before they hit the sidewalk, but I agree that is a hazard. Thank you all for your input, for your critiques, for your support. It's really appreciated, and I'm taking it all in, and I know staff is too. I'm going to call up the next panel of invited testimony. We have Matthew Kramer from PED PDX, who is a PED PDX CIC member from Northeast Portland. Maria Hernandez Segoviano from Opal, and Jenya Andreev, who is a PED PDX CAC member from East Portland. CAC stands for Community Advisory Committee. Welcome, everyone. Please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Matthew Kramer, and I'm a member of the Community Advisory Committee, the CAC for PED PDX. So we at the CAC spent the first part of PED PDX talking to each other and going out into the community talking with Portlanders about how we value the pedestrian experience. As we would go around the table at our advisory meetings, it was clear to me that equity was the core value. Equity was our North Star throughout this entire process. The Walking Priorities Survey results affirmed that the Portland community was in alignment with this value as well. Areas that serve people who rely on walking the most was the #1 priority in the majority of our city. Safety and demand were also identified as the guiding values throughout this engagement process. PED PDX builds on and enhances Portland's values and commitment around mobility, complementing Portland as a Vision Zero city, an age-friendly city, and a community of all ages and abilities. We spent a lot of time looking at the data to inform this plan. We looked at 10 years of crash data. As someone who loves walking, this was not a fun experience, but it was invaluable in defining the systemic problem to solve. Data included not just where, but the conditions for the crashes themselves. We could see the trends of a public health crisis occurring in specific parts of the city. The Pedestrian Priority Network is a data-driven response to maximizing community benefits. One item that really resonates with me within this plan is complete and maintain a pedestrian priority network that encourages walking for people of all ages, cultures, and abilities, and connects people to their essential daily needs. When the draft pedestrian priority network tool was developed, CAC members joined PBOT staff at civic group meetings to validate the network in fine-grained detail, to validate if any routes were being missed. Personally, I was able to work with the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods. I see the pedestrian priority network itself grounded in the values of equity, safety, and where we aspire to grow as a city. I was born and spent the first part of my life in East Portland. My parents worked downtown, which meant that I went to preschool downtown. I would go for walks with my fellow preschool-age children along comfortable downtown streets. I loved going for these walks as a child. They are likely the reason I ultimately served on the CAC. However, comfortable wasn't the experience I had in my own neighborhood streets in East Portland. My mom would need to drive us to Glendovier Park in order to move any meaningful distance on foot. I didn't understand this as a child, but what I was experiencing was the Portland paradox. Both places are technically Portland, but one allows people to move freely in their own neighborhoods, while the other requires a risk to the most vulnerable users of the street. The good news is I'm optimistic that PED PDX is a big step in the right direction for resolving this Portland paradox. PED PDX really embodies the value of the people of Portland. The data is dynamic and responsive to the ongoing community needs. It's a really actionable plan. We scanned a lot of other national plans throughout this work, and we could just really see that it was really clear and concise, and there was a strong focus on implementation. And this plan, as it's been reiterated today, it really walks the talk on equity. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Portland City Commissioners. For the record, my name is Maria Hernandez Segoviano. I am the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. I want to thank, first of all, the opportunity to testify today on the PED PDX plan. As an organization that builds power for environmental justice and builds and organizes within community who advocates for transportation systems around the intersections of inclusive housing, investment, without displacement, equity, health, safety, and empower engaged communities who enjoy equitable access access to lifeline services and fundamental human rights such as walking. It is such a pleasure to be here present and advocate also for this PED PDX plan. First, I want to thank and appreciate the efforts of the community engagement that PED PDX had during this development. We are glad to have seen our communities prioritizing the makeup of the type of prioritization that this plan should and could include. First of all, I also want to say thank you to our Buzz Riders members, who some of them weren't able to be here today, but who have been walking and talking and planning this process all along, particularly David Bouchard, Tristan Isaac, and Ben Pollock, who participated deeply in this engagement process. Therefore, as I mentioned, I can't emphasize how enthusiastic we are that this framework prioritizes equity, safety, and pedestrian demand, as we see those three components, in addition to options, as a key to achieve many other outcomes that are intersectional to a multimodal network in our communities. In relation to equity, we know research indicates that low-income communities engage in less physical activity than the general population, and some of our communities are less likely than other groups to get enough daily physical activity. This trend can be related in part to how communities and streets are designed, which has a direct effect on people's ability to be active. Our communities have faced historic disinvestment, and many of those decisions have been made intentionally to deny benefits to low-income people and people of color. Many of our neighborhoods do not have sidewalks, crosswalks, streetlights, parks, or recreational facilities. They often lack the healthy and culturally appropriate food, transit, biking infrastructure, and other daily necessities within walking distance of our homes. When our neighborhoods are not walkable, they are less livable. In regards to safety, racial profiling presence of police on transit systems, economic instability, and other factors that make Portlanders feel unsafe can prevent them from walking. That has something that has already been emphasized throughout the testimonies and the presentation earlier today as well. In addition, it can also deny the ability for parents or communities to allow their children to take transit, other forms of community engagement opportunities to engage more locally. Or EJ communities are oftentimes threatened by unsafe and often inaccessible streets and sidewalks, in addition to transit infrastructure. And because of that, our communities are also most likely to be stopped for jaywalking, which is more likely in neighborhoods which lack crosswalks. Therefore, it is such an important concept that this plan emphasizes beyond high crash corridors, the emphasis of going beyond what safety means for our communities. In regards to pedestrian demand, we need to be seen. Where we are, demand is a critical factor in these plans. We need to build sidewalks and safer pedestrian infrastructure in the places where more people are already walking. The areas identified for improvement are currently hazardous. People walk along the shoulders of roads, cross at unsafe, unmarked, and unlit intersections, and are put at risk of being hit by cars or injuring themselves, or uneven surfaces. When our neighborhoods are not prioritized, we are deemed invisible by decision makers. The number of people of color is growing in Portland daily. And yet we face worse outcomes for as long as decision makers pretend we do not exist. Other things that I think are important to consider in this plan, which again, we're super thrilled to have all of those three components of prioritizations in the framework of the plan itself, is given that the neighborhood revitalization occurs, it can bring unintended adverse consequences for low-income and people of color pedestrians. If it does not involve careful planning and strong and empowered community engagement like it did in the development process, new investment in infrastructure, public transportation can make surrounding neighborhoods more desirable, raising property values and spurring the conversion of affordable housing to higher-end units. This trend can lead to displacement of existing residents and minority-owned community businesses and can particularly affect renters. Leaving a neighborhood can mean not just leaving a home, but often social networks and community culture as well. Some of OPAL members have been gentrified out of the city, losing the protection of any Portland-based city policy as they move into Gresham or beyond. Low-income residents who are not displaced can still be affected as they can face significantly increased cost of living. Therefore, we need streets that not only connect us to transit and other means, but also to our homes. We encourage more coordination of this plan with the housing bond planning that is taking on a city level, but also on a regional level. And we also we want to ensure that new affordable housing prevents the displacement of our communities from the places this plan targets. Finally, I would like to say that another recommendation as the city continues, and I think this also addresses to a couple of the questions that were mentioned earlier on funding mechanisms, is that we need to be bold when it comes to that. We have been struggling as a city, as a region, as a state, to identify the resources necessary to fully fund a city's bicycle, pedestrian, and transit infrastructure that combines not only the intersections of transit and multimodal planning, but also housing. And so as the city continues to look for ways at low cost to fund this plan, we would like to see that any type of funding that comes available really focuses on these three priorities: walking being one, biking being another, and definitely transit being the third. We know that these types of local investment specifically have a greater greenhouse emission, have a greater impact on lowering emissions at a statewide level than other projects such as expanding highways and or roads can have. We ask to please consider dedicating any funding opportunity towards this prioritization on this plan in particular. Opal's membership was deeply involved in the creation of this plan. Members steered and advocated for this proposal. The lens this plan uses was shaped for low-income people and people of color, as well as advocates who understand our community's needs. So thank you, PVOD, for the wonderful community engagement that you have been implementing in this process. The City of Portland has a duty to low-income people and people of color to make for historic disinvestments in our neighborhoods to address longstanding equity concerns, to improve safety where is most needed, and to meet the demands for people who are walking. We encourage you to support the passage of this plan into law so that the city can get to work in protecting, uplifting, recognizing, and making our communities whole. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks. Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Zhenya Andreev. I was on the CAC, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience being on the committee and what I found really important that I got out of it. First, I want to say that I live in East Portland. I live east of 205, if you can imagine such a place. I like to say of East Portland, it's still Portland. We still pay the arts tax, and many of us work downtown. In fact, I work on the west side and took the streetcar here today. And I have to say there's certainly a perception and I think a lot of reality to this idea that East Portland's a forgotten area of Portland. Being on the CAC and reading through the PED PDX plan, I learned a lot about East Portland that I didn't even know. Look at the demographics, look at the statistics, see what a large percentage of the population lives there and what that population looks like. You might be surprised that this is really about 25% of the city we're talking about live in this area. So we're not a small piece of the pie, a pretty big piece of the pie. So when I found out that the CAC was actually actively looking for people from all different quadrants of the city, I thought that was really significant. I haven't seen a lot of committees that actively look for people that live east of 205 and actually want to hear them. And I think it made a big difference. I think that over the months, all the hours spent after work with the committee, being in a room with people that live in different parts of the town and being able to speak to them really on an equal plane felt really democratic and felt very significant, especially in this day and age, our political climate. For me, this felt like a way that I could personally contribute to something and that my voice mattered. As I said, I learned a lot while being on the committee, and being part of it meant listening to a lot of long presentations, looking at a lot of graphs, reading a lot of things, and then talking about them and arguing about them. And there were many instances that I could see that the PBOT team was really listening to our feedback and changing the direction and changing the plan based on that. This idea of a matrix of equity, safety, and demand was something we spent months talking about, and specifically the way that things like how much do we weigh equity versus safety versus demand. We crunched those numbers over and over again, and we actually asked them to change the equation and then see what comes up, and look at specific intersections. And I think that was something that the committee was able to help with. Well, I know in my neighborhood, the way that doesn't make sense, and we did a lot of what people in the room have been doing today is thinking about specific instances that you know about and assessing if it's accurate or if it's helpful. And I think that's so important to keep doing, that we have to use this mission of affirming walking as a fundamental human right and this tool of the equity, safety, and demand matrix, and continuously evaluate if we're doing it right. I think it's really radical to affirm walking as a fundamental human right. It's something that we spent months talking about, and it was so apparent right away that made sense. This committee really felt that strongly from day one. If you talk about walking, how can you say that, well, it's not feasible there, but I live there. What is that person supposed to do? So really, I just ask that you take that seriously, take that affirmation seriously, and ask yourself, how do we make decisions once we've affirmed a right? It's one thing to say that you have a right. How do we actually extend that right to people so they can enjoy it? Moving to East Portland about 4 or 5 years ago, I was afraid a lot of the times. I was worried that it would be very different than my experience living in North Portland and other parts of Portland. And I have to say, a lot of things, a lot of those worries were true, and a lot of them weren't. It's a beautiful neighborhood. It's incredibly diverse. I live walking distance from a Russian store. I was born in Russia, so it's a big deal for me. I see people there that I don't see in other parts of Portland, and I really do love that about this neighborhood. I am constantly shocked to hear about how many deaths occur while walking in East Portland. It's really jarring to get home and hear that news story, and sometimes there's even 2 in a day or 3 in a week, and it's really astounding. Once you start paying attention, it's different sort of hearing the numbers and the statistics, but really living that it's happening so frequently, and you just have to ask yourself, what is the price a person has to pay to live somewhere affordable? Why are we tolerant of this? What more can we do? And so again, we've affirmed this right. Like, how are we going to act on that right? How willing are we to say that equity is important enough to spend money and attention on? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our invited testimony. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. That was excellent testimony. Carla, how many folks do we have signed up?
We have 10.
All right, good. That timing is just about right then. Could we please have people come up as the council clerk, Carla, calls your name? And then if you could just give us your name for the record. The microphones should all be on, and they slide around about 6 inches away from your mouth. Turns out to be about the right. First 3, please, Carla.
Are Lisa Caballero, Stephen Gunvalson, and Rachel Banks.
Good afternoon. Would you like to go ahead and start, please?
I will. My name is Lisa Caballero. I'm the transportation lead with Southwest Hills Residential League. Mayor Wheeler, commissioners, and Commissioner Udaly, we were in transportation class together. Hello.
Yes, hello.
A tremendous amount of work has gone into creating the PED-PDX plan, and I congratulate Michelle Marks and PBOT team for their accomplishment. They've analyzed where pedestrian crashes are most likely to occur. They've cataloged all of our streets and documented whether they have sidewalks or not. They have a database of 23,716 street segments. I've downloaded it. I have it in a spreadsheet. I'm going to talk about that. And they've ranked each one of these streets with a priority score. In fact, the pedestrian priority network, as Ms. Marks pointed out, is one of the main deliverables of this effort, and it'll be used to determine PBOT capital improvement projects. However, I have two main problems with this prioritization method, and I'm bringing this issue up because I want to make sure that you know what you are voting for. So everything that's been said is wonderful. We're all pedestrians. I agree with all of this stuff, all of the aspirations. But you're also voting for an algorithm, and you're also voting for data sets, and I want to make sure that you understand how those two are interacting with one another. So we've heard a lot about equity, safety, and demand, and you would think the way it's being described that this is somehow a logical overlay. It's not. Okay, what the prioritization algorithm is, it's a big addition problem with about 12 terms, each which fall into one of those labels. And in their documentation, they say that it's equal weight between equity, safety, and demand. That's not true. And the reason that's not true is because you have data sets feeding into this which do not have the same distribution. So if you don't know what the distribution of a data set is, you're going to have trouble evaluating this algorithm. In reality, you can think of this as a big bathtub with 3 faucets. You've got equity points coming in, demand points coming in, and safety points coming in. When you take the weight, when you count all those points in the bathtub, 52% of them come from equity faucet, 37% of them come from the demand faucet, and only 11% of them come from the safety faucet. So Commissioner Fritz, some of your questions are really getting to the heart of this problem. I've written a report, I've mailed it to Marshall Runkle, I've submitted it in my testimony, but I'm not okay with a prioritization that's only counting safety 11%. The other big problem for someone in the Southwest is that lack of sidewalks is not counted as a risk, it's counted as a need. Okay, so all of our arterials and neighborhood collectors have been triaged because the fact that they lack sidewalks has not been counted. Am I done? I would love to talk to some more. I'm going to be emailing you all my report. I've written this up, and I would really like you to pay attention to it, and I think you're on the right track, but I don't think what's being presented is actually what's happening in the algorithm.
Very good. Could I ask you a question? You don't have to answer this if you
Yeah.
don't.
I'll try.
Are you a teacher?
I'm teaching constantly. No, I'm not.
You should be.
Well, thank you.
Because that was very impressive. In 3 minutes, you took what is a very complex prioritization algorithm and you explained it, in my opinion, nearly
you.
perfectly. That was great.
I'm
Thank
looking
you.
for people who understand it because the world's falling into two groups, people who quickly understand the math I've done and people that don't. I think it's important for you all to understand that a data set has as much impact on the outcome as the actual formula does.
Yeah, well, if you're ever looking for another career, you've got a real gift there.
Well,
Commissioner Hardesty.
I know who to go to.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much for your information. It fascinates me to know how much East Portland and Southwest Portland has in common.
I agree.
When it comes to the lack of infrastructure consistently, whether it's streets, sidewalks, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. And because I just got this fabulous report 2 days ago, I haven't quite finished it yet before the city council meeting. So do you see Southwest reflected in this report?
Yeah, I find the report, I actually was moved to tears at one point. I mean, the most impressive thing about the report is their whole database of streets and the level of detail they went in and actually discovering the street segments. I found it moving that they looked at Broadway Drive and knew about the elevator stairs and made that a segment. So yes, we were looked at, but the problem is what's dangerous about walking in a street in East Portland is very different from what's dangerous about walking in a street in Southwest Portland. East Portland, actually, your arterials have sidewalks and bike lanes. The problem is crossing at the intersections, right? We've got a lot of problems there.
Well, we have a lot of streets that don't have
Well,
sidewalks.
the smaller ones, but the main one, you know.
No, we have main streets that are horrible, like Stark.
Okay,
and
yeah.
Division, and yes, I could go on.
Okay, so the problem is we don't have any sidewalks at all. And so if you live north of Beaverton Hillsdale Highway and south of 26, we're also a transportation desert in there. We don't get bus service. If you want to catch a bus, you've got to walk to Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, but there's not a north-south street with a sidewalk to get you there. and then you got to cross Beaverton Hillsdale Highway where there's not a lot of connectivity. So what happens is we all can afford cars in Southwest, so we just don't walk. And that's not an okay solution either. So, and we have children. I mean, any prioritization that doesn't pick up Schultz Ferry, which is the main north-south street in the Southwest, maybe the only one, and it takes you from the shopping mall all the way to the zoo. TriMet won't run buses on it because it's not safe to put a bus stop there because there's no sidewalks. That street was triaged in this prioritization. That, to me, is a litmus test. That says something needs to change about the prioritization.
Thank you.
Thank you, but you do know that there's like 7 years of construction that's about to happen in that neighborhood, right?
On Schultz Ferry?
Yes.
No.
Is that the area that is happening? Didn't we have people come in earlier this week and tell us about 7 years of construction that's going to be happening?
Are you talking about Southwest Corridor? Yeah, no, not.
Southwest
that
Corridor?
area. It's,
Okay.
we don't need to continue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can send my report to you all.
Appreciate it. Carlin, were the other two of the first three not here?
It was Stephen Gunvalson and Rachel Banks. They may not be here.
All right, next three, please.
Are Claire Blatch, Doug Rogers, and Glenn Traeger.
Thank you for me. If you just hand them to Carla, and she'll take care of the rest. Thank you. Welcome. Would you like to go ahead and start, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Claire Vlach, and I'm also here representing Oregon Walks, where I'm a member of the Plans and Projects Committee, and I was also on the Community Advisory Committee. Walking in Portland would be better for everyone if we could implement everything in this plan, but we can't. The biggest hurdle to building the 350 miles of missing sidewalks is funding. The biggest hurdle to installing the 3,500 missing crossings is funding. The biggest hurdle to adequately lighting our streets and sidewalks, which was the #1 concern of the Walking While Black focus group, is funding. I know that the amount of money we need is probably staggering, but every little bit makes a difference. So please, fund PED-PDX rather than infrastructure for private cars such as highways or parking garages. The climate change crisis demands it. Even if we could magically fund all the improvements in this plan, there are a few things we would like to see that would make walking in Portland safer and more enjoyable. I'll touch on 3 of them. The first one is improving visibility at intersections. The plan says that allowing vehicles to park at the edges of street corners can, quote, significantly decrease visibility at street intersections and crossings, making it difficult for people driving to see pedestrians and bicyclists. Yet the plan only proposes to remedy this problem at uncontrolled crossings and only in conjunction with other construction. We would like the city to clear the corners at all intersections, period. The second thing is to encourage the city to see street trees as an essential part of pedestrian infrastructure. City policy should maximize our tree canopy through policies that place utility vaults out of the furnishing zone, allow street trees in the curb zone, and solve visibility, lighting, and sidewalk obstruction issues without turning to tree removal. The third thing is that as PBOT develops pilot studies for the alternative pedestrian walkways, we want to be sure that community concerns and suggestions are taken into account. Cheaper walkways are a good interim solution to our sidewalk funding problem, but only if they are safe and accessible for everyone. I want to close by thanking PBOT staff for all the hard work that went into developing PED-PDX. We look forward to seeing the plan implemented as we walk through the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, rather. My name is Doug Rogers, and I'm the president of Southwest Trails. And the volunteers from Southwest Trails have been following the development of PED-PDX with a great interest, and we would like to share with you several of our concerns. We are an all-volunteer citizen advocacy group that works to promote walking and biking in Southwest Portland. And as you probably know, we've been working closely with the PBOT staff and city for the past almost 25 years to develop a network of trail routes allowing walkers to avoid our presently unwalkable arterials. We do appreciate the efforts made by PBOT to identify our needs as citizens to walk and bike conveniently and safely in our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we feel this new planning effort is not recognizing the unique needs of Southwest Portland community. Because of our history and our geography, we have challenges that are different from much of the rest of the city. Our history is that we were built up in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, as was East Portland for that matter, same thing. We were county dominated, not in the city in those early years. And as a result, only about 3/4, the numbers are variable in there, of our arterials, of our streets have sidewalks. I'm sorry, it's the other way around. About a fourth, 34%, something in that area have sidewalks. The rest of them don't. So as a result, if you walk in our neighborhoods, you're usually walking in the street. There's no place else to walk. And that means you're in competition with the cars who are moving by and oftentimes not paying attention to people. Our geography is also a challenge because of our many hills, with the many ups and downs and curvy roadways that don't connect easily into a grid system, as does East County. That means that many of our streets are short, dead-ended, have limited major connected streets also that we don't have going north, south, or east-west. And if you're new to the area, it's very confusing sometimes, easy to get lost, and you have many detours to where you're trying to get to. Also, we want to mention that our city's zoning system, I see the light, means that low-income housing is concentrated along the PBOT's high crash corridors, Barber, Beaver, and Hillsdale. That's where we have low-income people living, because that's because of the zoning system, that's where the apartments are. Because of the equity process here, we come out low on the list of priority needs. We hope that somehow or other we'd have to recognize the needs of those people and make sure that they're met in the future. Just to close, big project. This is a work in progress, and we expect to be involved in the future. A lot of work has to be done in the future to make this all really reflect reality, and that's what we're trying to deal with, is reality here. So time is up. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Doug, for your testimony, and thank you as well. If I could just put a marker in here, because you said something that really piqued my interest, and I agree with. This report is not a static report.
Yeah.
And so we're not, there's an assumption that there will continue to be a process, I'm sure, Commissioner Daly, and this will continue to evolve with time as needs are brought to the attention.
Very important.
Very good. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Mayor, City Council members. My name is Glenn Traeger. Many pedestrians are killed in Portland each year by motorists. These deaths can be avoided if motorists would just drive slower and follow existing traffic laws. We do have an existing traffic law that would significantly reduce pedestrian accidents. It's called the crosswalk law, which requires motorists to stop for pedestrians entering an intersection crosswalk, either marked or unmarked. Unfortunately, this law is seldom followed. The city is becoming denser each year, and conflicts between pedestrians and autos are increasing. Portland spends millions of dollars each year in capital projects making roads safer for pedestrians. Why can't our city save some of this money and just enforce the crosswalk law we already have? It would make walking safer, and it will free up money for other important projects. I ask members of the City Council and everyone in this room to challenge themselves and follow the crosswalk law. You will see how important yielding to pedestrians is needed to save lives. It will also make you a better driver. I don't see how we can have it both ways. We can't have drivers ignoring traffic laws and safe streets for pedestrians. This is not a tough decision. I hope you act in a way of safety and life and start enforcing the crosswalk law. Please take my challenge and see how we can make Portland a safer and better place to live for all of us. Just one more thing. Most of the improvements proposed in the PED PDX plan will not be effective unless traffic speeds are reduced. What good are additional crosswalks and street improvements when cars are whizzing by, going too fast to yield for pedestrians? We need to slow down traffic on all city streets. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just say I don't disagree with anything that you said, other than we could somehow solve all of our pedestrian deficiencies if drivers simply recognize the crosswalk law. I personally do recognize that law, but frankly, it doesn't feel safe to stop for pedestrians a lot of the time because other drivers on the road are not recognizing or abiding by that law. We are lowering speeds around the city, as I'm sure you know. We are not allowed to lower speeds on certain streets due to jurisdictional power. We tried to have that changed at the state level. That did not succeed this year. So I largely agree, but again, there's a lot of work. I mean, basic accessibility is one. If you're using a wheelchair and there's no sidewalk or there's no curb cut, people stopping for you at a intersection isn't really going to be helpful. Thank you.
Can I make a comment? Or?
You could follow up with my office.
Yeah,
but
thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
Next three, please, Carla.
Are Don Bach, Glenn Bridger, and Hans Stoich.
And then who's after that, Carla?
One person left, Clint Culpepper.
Very good. Don, would you like to start? Sure. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Don Bach from Hillsdale. It's good to be here, and it's good to see you all. And before I start, Mayor, you're the only one of these four that haven't been out on a trail with us. I'd like to give you a walk around Southwest, as seen by those of us in Southwest Trails. I'll call your scheduler and invite you to come.
Perfect. I do a lot of running on those trails. I'd be happy to slow down.
That's great. That's great.
I was going to say, it might be hard for you to keep up, Mayor. Don will take you out for a whole day if you let him.
I know. I might want to do the whole Pacific Northwest circuit with Don.
It's only 40 miles.
Well, he's off to a good start.
Thank you. I've already used half my time. Anyway, staff deserves a well-deserved, a well-done for the great work they've done on putting together this millions of data facts and citywide thing, and particularly getting this priority pedestrian network put together. In Southwest, the Southwest Trails was our priority pedestrian network until this work has been done. So, to some degree, we are ahead of you. They've done a great job of adding actions, policies that will make walking in Portland safer for all of us. They also deserve credit for addressing 105 or more Southwest Trails identified connections that we asked them to look at to include in the pedestrian network. And the reason we did that is the permitting process, if we want to go out and hand tool build trails, is extraordinarily difficult. It's been we got the law changed in 2011, and we've had until now 3 projects approved under that law, which is abysmal compared to the need. We want to make it faster and easier, and this will help do that. First of all, finally, they addressed all of these and met with us face-to-face to do this. They didn't agree with all of them, and so we want to ask Commissioner Udaley to direct staff to work with Southwest Trails to, first of all, revise the urban trail routes, because there's a few changes that need to be made. We've got new construction, we've got better routes and safer routes that we can follow. And we also, our trails to some degree go into Washington County, and we want to put those on dashed lines so that we can then work with other jurisdictions to make their connections from their side tie in with ours, so we don't end up with, a tunnel that doesn't meet in the middle. We want to address remaining connections like Southwest Coronado, which is a street that is not included in the network, but and the PBOT's reasoning was, well, it's opposed by the neighbors. Our right-of-ways belong to all of us, and the neighbors should not have the unique right to say, no, you can't have a trail here. It's now used as a trail, but it needs improvement, and this is something we would like to do. It's really important. We want to revise the mapping of the Southwest Priority Network to include all properties, because right now, we've got it well mapped on the Peabot properties, but if the trail goes across school property, a park or something, it stops and says, oh, that's not part of the thing. That's important. Mayor, may I finish my list of asks, and then I'll stop?
Go for it. Yeah, you're
Okay.
not done yet.
Review the crosswalks as needed across Southwest. We haven't addressed those at all because there's so much other stuff here, and that's a detail thing we need to go through point by point. We've got a lot of experience walking out there, and we'd like to bring that experience to bear on making those decisions and priorities. Policing, allowing vehicle barriers on improved pedestrian routes. We've had cases where people have really done a beautiful job of decorating a trail, and then a car drives through it and totally destroys it. The sixth item is to a policy requiring a marked crosswalk at all trail crossings of arterials and busy streets. If you've walked the 4T, you know there's at least 2 crosswalks where we have a little sign saying a crosswalk. Nobody stops for those things. They need a zebra crossing before they even recognize to stop. And that's why we want to see that. And when you're on a trail,
Unfortunately, your time's up.
Okay.
But we have your written document.
thank you. I appreciate it.
We look forward to our next interaction.
Thank you. I could have said that, except that was so good that you just gave me. Thank you. Commissioner Fritz, you had a question
you.
for Mr. Bach.
So in your written testimony that you sent in before, you were asking for an extension of time to review the document. Are you still wanting that?
Well, if it's reasonable and the council decides that's appropriate. The important thing is that we get the 7 things I've requested here face-to-face with the Bureau and sort through those. There's some other issues that should be addressed as well, but these are the most important ones.
Thank you. I appreciate you prioritizing that. The section of Coronado that you're talking about, is that between 39th and 41st?
Where we would start, this is from Lancaster and go all the way to Boone's Ferry. It makes an alternate route to Southwest Stevenson, which is Southwest Arnold, which is basically a suicide mission to walk on right now.
And
So if we had this alternate route, we could
were
then.
opposed to it?
I'm sorry?
Which neighbors were opposed to it?
A couple, 3 of the adjacent ones, not all were. Hounds can speak to that more. Personally, he's been involved with it.
Okay, I'll have a question about that later. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good morning, Council. My name is Glenn Bridger. I live in Southwest. Walking in Southwest is a challenge, especially for a senior citizen, because anywhere in our area, it's hard to find a good place to walk. Now, Peabot staff is well aware of this, and they have commented in some reports and discussions that there are places where people just don't walk. They're too smart to go out there and put their lives at risk. Now, I've been working on community issues for the past 25 plus years, and on that basis, I really appreciate the thorough study that Peabot has made of the pedestrian needs in our community. It's fantastic. And I'd like to call special attention to the ongoing issues like pedestrian visibility that so frequently gets overlooked, but is so important either as a driver myself or as a pedestrian, because I get scared if I'm going to run into someone. Now, there are many safety concerns pointed out in the study, concerns that need to be fixed. We would not tolerate unsafe water if it were available. Why should we tolerate unsafe pedestrian facilities in our city? The report makes clear the shortfalls in safe walking places in Southwest Portland. The city should establish all of Portland with secure, safe routes. The most effective way to establish this is to put a minimum level of service that the city will provide for all communities. Now, they do, in a sense, provide a starting point on this with a minimum level of service for standards for crosswalks at transit places, for example. That is very important. But another area that is also very important would be provide sidewalks along all arterials. They are critical in Southwest Portland, and we have more of those arterials without sidewalks anywhere on them than probably anywhere else in the city. So that is very important. I hate to see pedestrians walking along on the roadways on arterials or on the marked bike lanes because there is no other place to walk. Our community has worked hard to bootstrap itself. Southwest Trails have been a hallmark with this, and sometimes trails gets misconstrued because what the community tries to do is maintain trails that were actually established as demand trails by others. Not build new trails, but demand trails that walkers automatically use to go from point to point. And providing the maintenance, making them safer and more environmentally friendly is a very important activity, and we need to have the resource to be able to do that cheaply and effectively. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Hans Stoik. I must excuse myself. I have a rather myopic view of the report. I really have only focused on what it says about what goes on in my neighborhood, Arnold Creek in southwest Portland. And there are some lovely paths on city right-of-way in southwest Portland. One of them was designated as a neighborhood walkway on 30th Avenue, allows me to walk from my neighborhood up to Marikara Park. On a piece of right-of-way. But there's some other lovely paths that were not designated as neighborhood walkways, and they are on Coronado Court and Coronado Street. The paths connect walkers to Boones Ferry Road and bus 38 service there on Boones Ferry Road and to the Boones Ferry Horse Trail on Tryon Creek State Park, natural area. In my mind, these paths are well suited to become part of neighborhood walkways such as defined by PED PDX. The paths are used by local residents. They are safer than the alternatives, busy Stevenson and Street and Arnold Street, which both have limited sidewalks. While the paths are used, they are not comfortable. In order to make them so, they need to be improved. Such improvement is resisted by some adjacent property owners. In some cases, the resistance has taken the form of fences built into the right-of-way, forcing walkers away from more level ground. I urge that PED PDX define as neighborhood walkway Southwest Palatine Heights Road connecting to 16th Avenue going east and the unimproved portions of Coronado Street and Coronado Court as defined in the attachment to my written testimony. And I do this in the hope that such designation will improve the likelihood that ultimately the paths can become more comfortable for those that do use them now and for all that would like to use them if they are improved. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks, all three of you. Next, I think it was just one more, Carla, is that right? One more
Correct.
person? Thank you.
Oh, did you have a
Clint Culpepper.
No, I'm going to get staff back. Thank you. You reminded me we've heard about this before.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing this today, and thank you for having me. My name is Clint Culpepper. I am a member of the Bicycle Advisory Committee and also the parent of 2 young children. I fully support the plan, and I definitely thank everybody who has had the opportunity to work on it. I know that it's been a big effort, so a big thank you to them. Please move swiftly on these strategies that have been laid out, as this year has been especially deadly for pedestrians. As Vision Zero makes incredibly clear, no death on our streets is acceptable. There may be actions in the plan that are controversial, like removing parking and slowing drivers by not allowing right-hand turns on red and lowering speed limits. But none of these outweigh the complaints, none of these complaints outweigh the safety of our city's residents. I'll make it brief, and I will leave you on an echo of a comment that Commissioner Fish made about the Bike Master Plan. We've failed to keep up with the pace necessary to move forward with the plan, and I'd hate to see that the PED PDX plan repeat those same mistakes. Our mode split is a very clear reflection of our failure to really fully embrace the 2030 Bike Master Plan. And if we fail to take action on the PED PDX plan, what we're going to see is continued deaths on the road that are absolutely preventable. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Colleagues, I'd like to ask Michelle Marks and Chris Warner, Director Warner, back up to the table for questions. I think some interesting issues were raised, and I'd like to give you a chance to ask them questions.
Can I ask a procedural question of the sponsor? Just in the remaining time we have to know where we're going with this. We have a resolution that is before us to adopt this plan. We've had some very specific testimony where people have said, I disagree that this street's not included, or I would change the emphasis on this. And it's, I think, heavy on Southwest Portland at the granular level. Southwest Trails has come in and said, we have 6 or 7 specific things we want to hammer out. I mean, this comes up periodically in these kinds of hearings, so I'd like some guidance from the sponsor about how we reconcile specific, and in some ways, we've had members of the public come and sort of imply amendments to the plan, or have said that they'd like to see some tweaks. And yet we're poised to adopt the plan as a living document and as a document that's going to adapt over time. How do we reconcile those two?
Sure. I mean, number one, as we've heard today, we've done an extraordinary amount of public outreach. This plan was put online in the spring. There was 90 days of public comment. I am not, I personally don't want to extend that public comment, engage in an endless public engagement process. We have really done our due diligence on the engagement piece, and it's time to move forward with a plan. But as Michelle mentioned, we will be coming back on an annual basis because this is, as you described it, a living document, and we know that conditions change on the ground, conditions change in neighborhoods. Therefore, the outcomes of our equation may change, and some of these projects may rise to a top level. As far as Southwest Trails go, I love Southwest Trails. I'm a fan of Dawn's. I don't think that this conversation is I don't think that this forum is necessarily the appropriate place for this particular conversation. We have addressed a lot of their concerns. They've gotten, I think, an extraordinary amount of attention, and we need to look at the city as a whole. And then finally, before I turn it over to staff, I just want to say I'm interested in what Michelle has to say about the data set versus the equation. And I think one of the things, yes, there's similarities between Southwest Portland and East Portland. They were both annexed into the city. Prior to annexation, they were allowed to develop in very different ways than the central city was allowed to develop, and that explains some of the differences between the more central city and these outlying areas. They face some similar challenges, but they're also distinctly different communities. East Portland is much more dense than Southwest Portland, which tends to be single-family homes, not, you know, I'm going to make some generalized statements. There are always exceptions, but this is generally true. Southwest Portland is much more affluent. East Portland represents some of the lower income communities in our city. Southwest Portland tends to be more white. East Portland is the most diverse area of our city. It also is home to 25% of our population. And I think most importantly, as we have heard repeatedly, people who live in East Portland are twice as likely to die when walking on the street as anyone else in our city. And so I feel very strongly that we've gotten this equation right. And when we are facing a public health crisis and we have limited resources, it is vital that we carefully prioritize these projects. My hope is as we do them, we're stitching together a more complete landscape, a more walkable city for everyone, but we really need to focus resources where people are in the most danger.
Yes, absolutely. I would I agree with everything you said, Commissioner Udaley, and I can just add a little bit more context to the safety analysis in particular. Yes, PED-PDX looked at 10 years worth of pedestrian crash data. We looked at every single pedestrian crash in Portland to look for the factors that may potentially be correlated with those crashes. roadway factors, design factors, operational factors, behavior factors, because what we wanted to do was to develop a prioritization that gets out in front of crashes. We don't want to just keep chasing improvements at locations after crashes have already happened. We want to make improvements before they do. So we really wanted to prioritize locations where those risk factors occurred. And what our analysis of 10 years of data showed us is that the risk factors are occurring on a small minority of the streets. So 96% of our street network are two-lane roadways. Our killed and serious injury collisions are happening on the other 4% of our streets. And that's exactly why we're not seeing this broad distribution of safety points that we heard questioned in some previous public testimony. The safety problems are happening on a very small subset, and those are especially our 5-lane arterials. We found in our analysis that you are, I think, 10 times more likely to experience a crash as a person walking along a 5-lane arterial than a 2-lane street. Along a 3 or 4-lane street, you are 4 times more likely to experience a pedestrian crash than on a 2-lane street. So the focus on that very small subset of streets was very much intentional. And the fact of the matter is that those streets tend to be in East Portland.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz, then Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you. So I absolutely support the prioritization, and I appreciate, Commissioner Udaley, your heartfelt, earnest intent to cut down on the pedestrian crashes, especially in East Portland. And there's needs all over the city. When I was in charge of parks, I prioritized putting parks money in East Portland, and with the support of the rest of the city. So that is not in question for me. I firmly believe that there's no point in having a public hearing if it doesn't matter what the public says when they show up. And although there's been a lot of process to date, I just saw this document the day before yesterday. And many people in the community only saw it the day before yesterday. And I know, now that Don Bach and Hans reminded me about this issue of Coronado, that there would have been 20 people here if more people knew about it. Because wasn't Commissioner Novick addressing this issue when you were working in his office?
I have a vague recollection of Coronado.
Yeah, so this was, before you were on the council, this is public right-of-way that people have fenced off so that the public can't use it, and that is a problem. And then when I was looking in my neighborhood, of course, we're all experts on our own neighborhood, the question that I asked you before, Michelle, in terms of the neighborhood walkway, it turns out I'm on a neighborhood walkway. It's the widest street in the neighborhood. It has no sidewalks. It has 3 street lights in 10 blocks. So, and yet just one street over is Coronado, which connects to the transit line, which you said was one of the criteria. It's got a perfect way to walk through where there isn't currently a street to be a much more direct connection. And so that's an instance where I don't know whether the representatives from Southwest were as familiar with this area. Well, they're not as familiar as I am because I've lived there for 25 years. But, there may be some tweaks to this that would benefit everybody at no cost and not interfere with the prioritization. So I'm wondering if we could even delay the vote for a week so that we could have a conversation about that specific issue, because I might like to offer an amendment.
And the specific issue, I'm sorry, it was the fence blocking a trail or
It's the
Coronado
designation of Coronado as a neighborhood walkway
versus
not designating it in the Arnold Creek neighborhood versus having Vacuna designated as the neighborhood walkway in West Walton Park.
And what functional difference would that make in the plan? I'm sorry, I don't have the map right
So I can answer that. The significance of having a pathway designated as a neighborhood walkway means that as community groups like Southwest Trails seek to make improvements, they have an expedited permitting process to do so. If it's not designated as a neighborhood walkway, they are still permitted and allowed to make those improvements. There's just a neighbor notification that's required. So the PED PDX classification really just results in a streamlining process.
I don't even know why my particular street would be designated a walkway.
Yeah, the answer is because it's designated as a safe routes to school. So all designated safe routes to school and neighborhood greenways are automatically designated as walkways in PED PDX so that we can support those programs.
Okay. On the maps where it's designated as city walkway, are those streets still eligible to get improvements, even if they're not prioritized sidewalk needs?
Yes, that is the first filter. You must be located on that priority network to be eligible for public improvements. And then the prioritization process then is applied to the network to inform in what order we should be addressing those needs. I'd also like to, if I may, just clarify a little bit about the process that went into identifying those classifications in pedestrian priority network. So we did we take all of those classifications to the district coalitions for vetting and refinement, and over I think a 2-month process. And so we did work very closely with the neighborhoods on that. We also worked, I think as Dawn mentioned, very closely with Southwest Trails over the last 2 months. To look at every single one of the 105 trail segments that they proposed for inclusion in PED PDX. I think of those 105 requested segments, 70 are included. And if a segment is not included, oftentimes it's because there may be a parallel route already on the network, or it's not in public right away, or it doesn't connect to the network.
Thank you for that explanation. In addition to pedestrian safety, I know that Commissioner Daley is also very concerned about climate disruption, as we all are. As you were talking about the safety, the 3 criteria, and the safety is involved with crashes, what that doesn't measure is where people don't walk at all because they can't. So there's a section of 35th by Jackson Middle School. I live a half a mile from Jackson Middle School. I drove there 7 years with my 3 kids because you cannot walk. There isn't a way to get there safely on foot. Yeah. So there's not going to be any crashes because nobody walks there. On the other hand, Commissioner Hardesty this morning we had a small discussion about park and rides. The reason we need a park and ride at Barber Transit Center is because you can't get there safely on foot.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly why we elevate risk factors even above historical crash data in our safety analysis in recognition of that very fact. So we look at the risk factors, the width of the roadway, the vehicle speeds and posted speeds, those factors that are associated with risks. That way we can direct improvements to roadways that may not have seen a pedestrian crash yet, perhaps because people are scared to walk there.
But Leah pointed out that lack of sidewalks is identified as a need rather than a risk.
That's correct. Lack of sidewalks, missing sidewalks is what we are prioritizing. If lack of sidewalks were a risk, we would have no priority anywhere in the city that's missing sidewalks. That's what we are prioritizing, the gap.
Okay.
Commissioner Hardesty.
I would just like to respond.
Sure.
There's a difference between not being heard and not getting the answer that you want. And Southwest Trails has definitely been heard. The public has definitely been heard. We vote on resolutions at the first reading. I don't see why this would be any different. I don't believe that this conversation needs to hold up the PED PDX plan or is necessarily the appropriate forum for it. If the majority of my colleagues believe that we should give more time for public input, I would concede a one week additional public comment period just in line with how we would handle a non-emergency ordinance, which is a first reading followed by a second reading a week later. But I don't anticipate any substantive changes in this plan, whether we have additional public comment or not.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's very gracious of you. I would appreciate another week, partly for public input, but partly because I want to have that discussion, which I think we're all getting tired about what's happened on that particular segment since you worked on it with your previous commissioner, because there's a huge, there's a takings issue there where a private property owner has taken public right-of-way and people cannot walk there anymore, and that's a problem.
But isn't that an entirely separate issue? What does that have to do with the PED PDX plan? Because someone needs to file a complaint and someone needs to follow up on that complaint. It's not.
I don't know where we are on that. I can find out. I just don't remember.
Thank you.
So,
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you both for your presentation. I just will say I share Commissioner Fritz's concern, because when I get a book like this 48 hours before I'm asked to vote on it, that is not respectful of the folks who have to make the policy decision around this, right? I actually like to read what I'm voting on actually before I vote on it. I'm just weird like that. So it would be I'd be very appreciative if there was enough time for me to actually get all my questions answered before I'm asked to vote. So I just wanted to put that on the record. My second question is, one of my big concerns, and I don't think this costs money, but Chris, you're the expert, so you can tell me, especially in East Portland, but this is true all over the city of Portland, is because we allow people to park up to the curbs, it is absolutely difficult to see around vehicles, especially tall vehicles, who are parked on the corner legally, if there are pedestrians using the street. And I can't tell you how many times that you feel like you have to ease out in the traffic just to see if there's any people, especially little people on the sidewalk, before you pull out in the traffic. Could we, on every street, just do a setback to make sure that people aren't parking at a place where you actually can't see around them?
actually, that's one of the strategies that's outlined with strategy one.
Honestly, I can't remember what
Okay.
number it is.
Yeah, but thank you. That's something that's definitely within the strategy and something we're trying to implement. So
But I think what we're trying to do is implement it in some neighborhoods, but wouldn't that be good to implement all over the city of Portland as compared to just in high crash areas?
Well, I think the plan was to implement it at unregulated intersections to begin with, but I'm very supportive of this. You missed this part, but it's definitely part of the plan. And I noted that we have slacker restrictions than the state. We have exempted ourselves somehow from the state standards. But I would like to take the opportunity to say, if your vehicle is over 6 feet tall, you should not be parked within, is it 20 feet of the corner?
50 feet.
It's, well, by Portland regulations or state regulations?
I believe that's city regulation as well.
Okay, yeah, so if you're driving a giant vehicle, you should not be parking on the corner. I know that's not going to do much good at all, but maybe 10 people in this room
Have those
know
vehicles.
something new.
I learned something.
Oh, good.
Thank you, that is all. And I support the delay and the vote, because I, again, want to read what it is I'm voting on
Sure.
before I vote on it.
And I raised that issue with staff. I think we're hearing loud and clear that commissioners need more time to review these plans. And so I'm fine with delaying the vote for a week.
So could I just clarify to make sure I understand the sponsor's intent? So we will be continuing this to presumably next week, is that correct?
I guess.
Next week's horrible.
Well,
So let's do this. Let's decide. We want to continue it. It sounds like there's consensus
will
for
leave
that.
it
We
open
need to
to-
pick a date.
Yeah.
And we need to decide whether the oral record remains open or not.
No.
Okay, so the oral record will be closed. We've heard the testimony, but it sounds like we are keeping the written record open. Is that correct?
written record will be open for a week.
Very good.
It will come back next week. That's what I'm
And
offering.
I guess the hope would, we can check in with you in terms of as you have questions during the week, and so hopefully we won't have to have next week, we'll have answered your questions.
Yeah, if you could make an
Yeah.
appointment, I'd like to have at least a half an hour.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, good. Well, I want to thank Commissioner Udaley, and I want to thank PBOT staff, and I want to thank everybody who testified. This is a big, bold vision that covers multiple decades, so it's understandable that we wouldn't necessarily get to the final answer today, but I want to just acknowledge, I think it's fantastic work on the whole, and I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I didn't say, Chris, congratulations.
Thank you.
In your new role. That's very
Yes,
exciting,
appreciate
and you worked hard to earn it and deserve it. So congratulations.
Mayor, can I just add?
Commissioner Fish.
I want to just be clear. I was prepared to vote on this today, and I view this as tantamount to accepting the report. I think there's going to be a lot of issues that come up moving forward where changes will be made or compromises will be reached. Or Don Bach, who is a top 10 advocate in my book, is never shy about inserting himself into ongoing conversations. Don will be well represented in the implementation phase. So I was prepared to, in effect, adopt the report today. Not to say that I give my blessing to 365 pages, but it's a vision. It's a vision document. And there's going to be lots of moments where we come back and talk about, is this the right vision, piece of the vision in terms of sequencing? Is this the right approach? And how do we pay for it? So it's a very dynamic process. But I also respect the desire of colleagues to have a little more time. Look forward to voting on this next week. I have to say, there's something in the air today because we've had some outstanding hearings at this council. I mean, there are days when I go home and tell my wife, Patty, I'm surprised I get paid to do this job. We had a couple of hearings this morning, which were really interesting, and where we had first-rate panels and testimony. I thought this brought out the best, as it often does. Fascinating discussion. I learned a lot. So I want to thank PBOT for structuring, first of all, doing all the hard work, and then structuring this conversation, because I think it's been very valuable. And I have to say, I'm in awe of the staff that's working on this, because no matter what question you asked, you seem to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the city and its streetscape. So kudos to that level of detail and that level of ownership of the plan. It's very impressive. So thank you all very much.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Commissioner Fish. I will obviously save my closing remarks for next week. I just want to say thank you to Michelle and thank you to Director Warner, to the entire project team, Community Advisory Committee, the Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and everyone who came to testify today. It's a very interesting conversation.
Very good. Then this item is continued till next week. The oral record is closed. The written record will remain open. So if people want to email comments, they can most certainly do that. And Director Warner, where's the best place for people to email comments? Or should they just send it to the council clerk as per usual?
Yeah, Council Clerk.
Council clerk it is. All right, that's continued. We'll read 547 before we take a brief break. 547, please.
Approve mini area parking permit program to reduce requirements for initiating an area parking permit program.
Commissioner Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. We have pulled this item back to my office for further analysis.
Without objection, we're in recess for 5 minutes. We are back in session. Item number 548, please.
540, yes. 548,
548.
authorize settlement agreement with and memorandum of understanding with Portland Firefighters Association to settle a retroactive pay grievance and tort claim and allow for the city to make payments totaling $53,495 to certain former and current bargaining unit members.
Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a settlement from our last fire contract. There was an arbitration filed, and we have come to what we believe is a good settlement and a good process to make sure that this is not an issue in the current fire contract that we are now negotiating. And so on that note, I will turn it over to our esteemed panel. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners. I'm Ryan Gillespie, Interim Fire Chief for Portland Fire and Rescue. To my right is Senior Deputy City Attorney Heidi Brown, and to my left, Jarrell Gaddis, Labor Relations Manager. And I also want to recognize Alan Ferschweiler, President of Local 43, in the House here today. We're here to discuss a settlement agreement and memorandum of understanding with PFFA. This ordinance today pertains to PFFA members who retired or separated from employment with PFNR after June 30th, 2016, but before the collective bargaining agreement was adopted via interest arbitration on December 29th, 2017. There's 26 individuals. Those individuals are identified in Attachment A. The total dollar figure that we're talking about is $53,494.72 for this settlement agreement. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Heidi Brown, and she will provide further detail on the settlement agreement and the MOU.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So we had two matters pending. There was a grievance that was filed, and then additionally, there was a tort claim notice that had been filed on behalf of retroactive payments that the union felt was owed to certain employees who, as Chief Gillespie said, retired after the conclusion of the old contract, July 1, 2016, but before we adopted the new contract via interest arbitration. The question would be, the tort claim notice would be resolved via the grievance. So the question would be, well, how would the arbitrator rule? And I felt that there were issues where an arbitrator could rule either for or against us. If they ruled against us, the arbitrator would award wages and benefits that would total approximately $100,000. And then it would also set a standard going forward that people retiring in this interim period or separating from service would then be entitled to retroactive pay, and we would have to track them down and give them their payments. If we won, then there would be no wages and benefits, and it would set the standard the opposite, that we would not pay. In this settlement, and then the final thing would be that if we lost in the grievance, then we would also have exposure under the tort claim notice, which would increase our potential liability because you're not only looking at the wages and benefits, which we would pay pursuant to the grievance, but also there would be penalties and attorney fees that could significantly bump up that expense. So under the settlement agreement, we agreed to just pay the wage portion only, not the additional benefits that could be due and owing, and that totaled the $53,495, as Chief Gillespie said. Additionally, though, what we're gaining is we have a tentative, the parties agreed under the settlement agreement that we'll sign a tentative agreement stating that going forward, anybody who separates from city service after the end of the prior contract, but before we've adopted a new contract, either via ratification by council or by interest arbitration, that those folks will not be entitled to retroactive pay. So we have it set the way that we'd like to have it, and we don't have to worry about going forward any question about that resolving in a different way than we'd like. So I think, and then dismissing any claims under the tort claim notice, the individuals will individually dismiss their claims and the union will dismiss its claim. So those are the benefits to why we felt that this was a reasonable settlement for council to consider. And if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Seems like a reasonable compromise. Commissioner Hardesty?
Thank you. I move that we accept, are we going to, are ready to vote on this?
It's actually an ordinance, so we
It's an
still,
ordinance,
yeah, we have to take
Oh, we just
public
have to-
testimony, and as you can see, there are thousands of people here waiting to testify. How many people, if any, do we have signed up?
No one signed up.
Does not surprise me, since we only have one person here.
And he's just making sure I do it right.
Very good. So unless there's any further discussion, we'll call the
Mayor,
roll.
before
Commissioner
we
Hardesty.
vote, I just want to appreciate the fine legal counsel that we have working with us at the Fire Bureau, and just how wonderful it's been both to work with legal counsel and with labor, and just what good partners they've been in helping us to resolve a lot of issues. When I inherited the Fire Bureau, I inherited a lot of arbitration. That most of it just went away because we just made it go away. And I just want you to know that it's because we've got a fine team that works very hard to get to a win. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
All right, we're ready.
Very good. Please call the roll.
Hardesty,
Aye.
Udaly,
Aye.
Fritz,
Thank you for your work. Aye.
Wheeler.
Good work, everyone. I vote aye. The ordinance is adopted. We are adjourned.
Thank
Thank you.